I was told that if you speak at Monash University, you have to wear a three-piece suit. I went to La Trobe, so I initially thought maybe a tie-dye jumpsuit. But I changed my mind, but I might take my jacket off. I have to go to a wedding at 5, not my own, nor a same-sex wedding. So, but thank you for being here, and thanks for having us. Paul will be the sensible voice, and I'll say what I need to say. But I've been at VALS for nearly 8 years, and I might start by acknowledging the traditional owners of this land, the Wurundjeri people and people of the Kulin Nations, and pay my respects to the elders past and present. I was sort of wondering where to start with all of this, given that there's been a long history in this country. Before white people came here, there was obviously a much longer history, but where to start from this point? I'm a criminal lawyer, Paul's a criminal lawyer, and that's the experience that I have. This is the Royal Commission into Aboriginal Deaths in Custody, and this is the 20th year since that was released. I've been told not to call it an anniversary for good reason, but I thought maybe that was an interesting enough place to start and perhaps a good focal point. So this report is actually later, it's the Victorian implementation, but the Royal Commission into Aboriginal Deaths in Custody was announced in '87 after a spate of Aboriginal deaths in prison and police custody, and in response to public concern about those deaths and why they were happening. So in '88, the final report was submitted, and in April, pardon me, it began in '88, the final report was in '91. And it looked at a variety of different factors that were coming into play and tried to draw a picture of why this was occurring. And what was apparent in that, and is apparent today in my view, is that there was poverty, drug and alcohol use, the history of the country, and also police racism. The report found, and I might say that Aboriginal Australians at that time were between 7 and 22 times more likely to die in custody than non-Indigenous Australians at that time. So it was an important report, and one of the findings was, and this is a quote, that being Aboriginal played a significant, and in most cases a dominant role in why a person may be in custody and why that person might die in custody. What does all that mean, I guess? And I might say, working at the Aboriginal Legal Service, our computer cacked itself, so I have to try and read my own handwriting, so that might be tricky. What I experience as a criminal lawyer is that people that come before the courts don't just come before the courts. They don't get there just because they happen to commit an offence. The vast majority of those people before the courts in general are people who have the issues that were identified in the Royal Commission, and that is that they are poor, they are homeless, they have issues with housing, they have substance abuse issues, mental health issues, and usually, and more likely, a cross-section of all of those things happening at once. Aboriginal people in Victoria fit into those categories. Fall perhaps is the wrong word, as I think more likely there's a history that puts them into that. Did you just sigh, Paul? Yeah. Okay. But that's the demographic of Aboriginal Victorians find themselves in that demographic, if you like. So there's a slice there, and we find that Aboriginal people are overrepresented in the courts, and statistics tell us that that's right. It's, and I'll come back to those statistics, but it's around poverty, it's around living in marginalised communities with inadequate access to education often, to drug and alcohol treatment. There are often substance abuse issues and mental health issues that come in. And of course, one thing that can't be forgotten is over-policing of Aboriginal people, partly because of visibility and partly because of a gathering in public places and the involvement with police that usually comes on the back of that. Statistics are great, and this is... my colleagues have kindly provided me with a number of statistics, but in my view, it's more important to look at some examples of how this interplays practically with members of the community. So I might say, give you two examples. One is of a man that I met in 2004 in Mildura. He was in his 30s at that time, and he was his name was Paul Carter, and he was a man who had a very long history of coming before the courts, and that's how I met him. He was someone who had an intellectual disability. He had an acquired brain injury that developed as a result of substance abuse. In fact, when he was 7, I'm told he used to travel with a soft drink can to the local shop, and the shop owner very obligingly would supply him with a soft drink can full of petrol so he could commence inhalant use. He lived in Mildura for all of his life, and he was a dynamic character in the times that I met him. He was a very spirited chap who used to love to walk, spend time by the river, and when he became agitated he was quite vocal, and often that would draw the attention of the police. Often he was charged, often he was taken into custody, and that continued for some years. He, in 2006, moved in with his partner in Mildura, and they lived together. He was using drugs and alcohol fairly heavily at that time, and became upset because one of the neighbours had said something to him, and so he made some threat. The police arrived, they took him into custody, he was refused bail and held in the cells. I appeared for him, and due to extremely good advocacy, he was released on bail. And he was released on bail with conditions that he go and receive some drug and alcohol treatment, and the magistrate wanted him to come back and show her what he'd done, and that was the plan. He was bailed to his parents' address, and they lived in Mildura Central, and he did that. I then went on leave for a month, which was much deserved, and came back, and I happened to see him in the street. That was in July 2006, and he came up to me. He was sober, he was boy-like almost, and he showed me a picture of a bear he'd just bought from a sponsorship program in the Mildura Mall, and he was really happy about that. Had a picture of it. He had some artwork with him. He was a very, very, very talented artist, and had won prizes for that as well. But he was good. He was very good. That's the last time I saw him, because he then went back to his parents' house. He was then living at that premises, and I understand that he was going fairly well in terms of his treatment. In August of 2006, his brother, who was in his early 30s, and again a long-time resident of Mildura, died of a heart attack, and obviously that was unexpected, and the family went into mourning. He was one of the family members that was mourning. The family gathered across this weekend and spent time together, and he then went to his partner's house to continue that process. As he was wont to do, he became quite vocal, and the police ultimately were called, and 2 police cars arrived and took him away in the back of the divisional van. They were aware that his brother had passed away, and they took him, rather than travelling 3 kilometres this way or thereabouts, and Mildura is made up of avenues and streets, they travelled this way for 15.5 to 17 kilometres. At midnight, he hadn't committed an offence, and they left him on the Strait highway at around about midnight, in the middle of winter, and he was hit by a truck within 30 minutes and he passed away. So this family dealt with the loss of not 1 but 2 sons, brothers, uncles, in less than 48 hours. And those police, in my view, were grossly inadequate in the care that they had for this man, and an inquest followed, and some years down the track they were disciplined by being removed from the community and now police elsewhere. He wasn't afforded proper care. They failed in their duty of care to him, and the community, rightly so, and his family, rightly so, were outraged by that. It's not an unfamiliar story about the way police deal with Aboriginal people in Mildura, which is where I've spent the majority of my time. and he shouldn't have died that night. He was a member of your community, he was a member of their community, and it's a story that's not told because it's an unsavoury story, and it's a story that people don't want to hear. And he was a good man. So where does he fit into this? He's a statistic, because it could be considered that he died in custody, having been removed from custody almost immediately, and there's a whole lot of argument that went on around whether he was in custody or not. It's a pen. I'll get that. The second story I want to tell you is about Melissa Colour, who is 24 years of age. She was 23 at the time that she was 22 when I met her. And she's someone who comes from far north Queensland. She came to Melbourne about 5 years ago. She came down to Melbourne to start again. She had family down here. She'd had a fairly rough time in Queensland, and she decided to come here because she wanted to start over and see what Melbourne could offer her. She did that. She came and stayed with family in Collingwood area, and she got on with her life as best she was doing. She met a chap in Smith Street who she befriended. They started a relationship, and ultimately they moved in together. He was a man who was a refugee to this country and had suffered enormous trauma in his home country, and he was a very, very unwell man who came before the notice of the police on many occasions. He had an acquired brain injury, and in fact he was housed in a property through our VALS, which deals with people with acquired brain injuries. She lived with him, and she lived with him against the rules of our bias, but on their documentation they allowed it because she calmed him down, she cooked for him, she cleaned for him, and when he was in fits of rage, which he often was, she would calm him down. That went on for some time, and his ill health escalated so that in September of 2008 he had 24-hour carers living within that property, and she remained there. There's documentation that says that there was a view that he would be assessed to be deemed an involuntary patient and to be sectioned under the Mental Health Act. In the days leading up to the night that she and he became heavily intoxicated, had an argument, he came at her, she stabbed him once, he died. She didn't mean to kill him, she was charged with murder, and I might say that there was a worker present that night. He was told to leave and he did, and it left just the two of them alone together.